We will be reading from the English Standard Version. Luke chapter 22, verse 24. A dispute also rose among them as to which of them was to be regarded as the greatest. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those in authority over them are called benefactors. But not so with you. Rather, let the greatest among you become as the youngest, and the leader as one who serves. For who is the greater, one who reclines at the table or one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at table? But I am among you as the one who serves. You are those who have stayed with me in my trials. And I assign to you, as my Father assigned to me, a kingdom, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. Peter said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you, both to prison and to death. Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you deny 3 times that you know me. And he said to them, when I sent you out with no money bag or knapsack or sandals, did you lack anything? They said, nothing. He said to them, but now let the one who has a money bag take it, and likewise a knapsack. And let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. For I tell you that this scripture must be fulfilled in me. And he was numbered with the transgressors. For it is written about me has its fulfillment. For what is written about me has its fulfillment. And they said, look, Lord, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, it is enough. And he came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and knelt down and prayed, saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to them, why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation. While he was still speaking, there came a crowd, and the man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He drew near to Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? And when those who were around him saw that what would follow, they said, Lord, shall we strike with the sword? And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, no more of this. And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple and elders who had come out against him, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness. Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, this man also was with him. But he denied it, saying, woman, I do not know him. And a little later, someone else saw him and said, you are also one of them. But Peter said, man, I am not. And after an interval, of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, "Certainly, this man also was with him, for he too is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And immediately while he was speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Now the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking him as they beat him. They also blindfolded him and kept asking him, "Prophesy, who is it that struck you?" And they said many other things against him, blaspheming him. When the day came, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to their council, and they said, "If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you will not believe me, and if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God." So they all said, "Are you the Son of God then?" And he said to them, "You say that I am." Then they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips." The word of the Lord.
The significance of what Jesus did for us through the cross and empty tomb give a new meaning and purpose to all of our days. And as we prepare together for this celebration of Easter at the beginning of April, Luke this morning draws our attention to what Jesus is going through and how his disciples fail to grasp what he's going through again and again. These lines show us the disciples at their moment of greatest failure that on some level we can all relate to. The glimpse Luke gives us into the upper room with Jesus and his disciples is something like a glimpse into a Super Bowl locker room right before the big game. The coach knows what's at stake, and he needs his players to be totally focused on the task at hand. He's just coached them up on the strategy they've got to follow if they're going to have a shot at winning. He has warned them that their opponents are cunning and will exploit any weakness that they show. The minute he ends his pep talk, they begin squabbling about which one of them is the best. I guess in this scene, each of the disciples are like Terrell Owens saying, I love me some me, right? That's what we see in the upper room. They boast of how many touchdowns they've scored, how many sacks they've recorded, interceptions that they've made throughout the season, and argue about who did the best in all of their different games to get them to this point. They quarrel about who should really be in the starting lineup and who should get to hold the trophy at the end of the game after they've won to take photographs. So the coach breaks in and he tries again to explain the gravity of this game, the importance of total focus. He explains to them that they've come a long way together. He shaped them into this great unit that they are, and he has great plans for where they'll go from here. He warns their quarterback, who's also the team captain, that he's going to have a particularly difficult game out there because the defense is tough. But he assures them that he'll be all right in the end. The quarterback breaks in arguing, "No way, coach. I'm going to be the MVP today. You can count on me. Write it down." The coach warns him again, this opposing defense is really tough. Before halftime, he will have turned the ball over twice and committed a key penalty that's going to hurt the team. Then the coach tries another tactic as the minutes before the game tick away. He warns them that this is going to be the toughest game of their lives, and that he's not even going to be on the sideline with them the whole time the way he has been up to this point. They'll have to think for themselves. It's going to be a real dogfight. And that's when one of them shouts, "That's all right, coach. I'm just ready to go punch him in the nose." The coach gives up. "That's enough," he says. "Let's just get out there and warm up." That night at the supper, Jesus was preparing his disciples for the most important conflict of their lives. They were facing the turning point of human history, and he knew they just weren't ready for it. You could tell by their actions, by their attitudes, by what they said to each other. They were not ready for what was about to come down. They argued about which of them is going to be regarded as the greatest. And so Jesus answers by standing the notion of greatness itself on its head. Peter, who is going to be like the quarterback and the team captain moving forward, fails to realize that he's only those things because Jesus selected him for that role. And Jesus had given him protection prayerfully in advance for a trial that otherwise would have proved to be fatal. Before the night is over, Peter will have denied knowing Jesus at all 3 times. Jesus again warns the group that they're about to face a time of testing, and he's not going to be with them like he was before. And they show their complete failure to understand what he's talking about when they point to the 2 swords they have. And finally, Jesus says that's enough. No matter what he says at this point in the narrative, they're determined to misunderstand him. And so it's just time to go out and face what's unfolding before them. And what emerges from this whole picture is just the sheer loneliness of Jesus. Both at the supper for which he had longed, and then later as he goes off in the garden in prayer to wait for his betrayal, arrest, and all that would follow. Jesus alone would bear the world's sin. And reading this story, it's like the word alone becomes even deeper than what you could imagine before reading it. Even through that terrible, lonely despair, there is hope. The disciples don't understand yet what the kingdom is or how it is to come. But even through their failure, the true victory of the kingdom will be won by Jesus through Calvary's cross. Not even their greatest failure can thwart his mission. Surrounded by human failure on all sides, Jesus will endure and bring redemption to all who would call upon his name by faith. Like we said, Peter is the quarterback. He's the captain of this early band of disciples. He's the main play caller in the early church. And here we see him failing miserably at every turn in his job. As we read this story, I think we find ourselves swallowed up in it, and we want to stop him and say, look, shut up for a minute and listen to what the master is trying to tell you. Stop being so arrogant and prepare for what's coming. But the action continues, and we see ourselves in Peter as, again, he fumbles, throws interceptions, and arrogantly commits untimely penalties. To varying degrees, we can all relate to Peter's struggle because at one time or another, we've been there. I remember my first ever T-ball game. How many of you have ever played T-ball or Little League? Any of our CYBL guys? T-ball, Little League, coach pitch, any of that? Anybody? You got some here that are not paying attention because they're not raising. Some out there, okay. Well, T-ball's wasn't nearly as cool when I played as Little League and T-ball and coach pitch are now. I shared in gym service the name. What was the name of your team, Casey? You're the Astros. Somebody, and then in your basketball, we had like Super Friends and Superstars, really cool names, right? There was the A's, the Red Sox, like all these great names. Well, my T-ball team was Donahoe Insurance. Period. We had an orange uniform with some kind of goofy orange trucker hat, foam hat, and it just didn't look like the big leagues, right? We were the Donahoe Insurance, I guess, fighting agents or something. I don't know what you could be. The boy who played first base on our team was the coach's son, and he struggled in every game. Just really, he couldn't cover first base at all. And conversely, I played in practice really well at first base. And finally, after several weeks of practice, I got the opportunity to play first base in a game. It was my moment to shine that instead became my childhood nightmare that I relive, sometimes in dreams, waking up in cold sweats. All of a sudden, when the umpire yelled, "Play ball," somehow I forgot completely how to catch a baseball. Just altogether forgot. And I couldn't catch anything, and as Murphy's Law would have it, everything came my way. Everybody hit the ball my way, and if they didn't, somebody threw the ball my way, and I couldn't catch any of it. All game long, I never made a play. I was terrible, and I was crushed. I remember crying on the way home. It was devastating. I had my one shot, and I blew it. Had that gone differently, I'd probably be playing Major League Baseball right now. Were it not for, my lack of baseball skill and general athletic ability, I totally could have made it. But I think most of us have had experiences like that, either on the athletic field or court or just in life, when everything's hit our way and we miss it all. We just make the same mistake over and over and over again. We fall short, we fail, we trip up. We just have experiences like that, like Peter, where we arrogantly profess our faith on Sunday and then live on Monday like all of that's just a lie. We catch ourselves laughing along with inappropriate jokes at the water cooler. Somebody at the barbecue slams believers unfairly, ridicules Christianity, or blasphemes God. And there we are, either quiet or participating in all of that. Someone approaches us with questions about a Christian message on our t-shirt. We just kind of look at our feet and say, something I got at church, no big deal. Friends say, hey, I didn't know you guys went to church. And we say, we go every once in a while. We're not all that religious, really. It's for the kids. Maybe we remember a time when we were growing in faith and leading in the church, and now we find ourselves so mired in worldliness that we can scarcely remember those days. If people looked at our lives and looked at the lives of our pagan neighbors, they really wouldn't tell a whole lot of difference. We find ourselves being less of a living witness and more of a stumbling block. We're so quick to join Peter in saying, Lord, when push comes to shove, I'll be there for you. Even if all these other losers fall away, I'll go to prison with you. I'll die for you. And then more often than not, we join Peter by the fire, denying that we know Jesus at all. So what do we do when we find ourselves in that boat? And we all find ourselves in that boat at one time or another. How can we come back from that kind of real life blooper reel of faithless follies? Well, a few chapters earlier, Luke showed us the beautiful prayer of the tax collector in the temple, who stood off to himself and beat his chest in sorrow, looked down at his feet and cried out to God, God, be merciful to me, the sinner. And there's our starting place. We see ourselves in Peter, but it's in the words and actions of Jesus that our hearts are set toward Easter and filled with hope. For though Peter and the other disciples failed at every turn, just as we do, Jesus succeeded in God's mission and went all the way to the cross for you and for me. Just as Jesus restored Peter after his great blunder, Jesus reaches into our lives when we are broken and confess our sin, and we cry out to him, and he forgives us, and he restores us, and he sets us on the path of service in his kingdom. I love how Cleve Ford put it a few weeks ago. He said, Jesus died on the cross because I really needed him to. What a great theory of atonement. In our seasons of identifying with Peter's sinful arrogance and pitiful denials, we discover how Jesus takes our greatest failures and somehow turns them into victory. Our faith is not about how good we are, but about how good our God is. And through Jesus, we experience his grace that is greater than all of our sin. Julia A. Johnston captures the prayer of our hearts when we identify with Peter in our failures and in our experience of God's grace through Jesus Christ our Lord, when she said, marvelous grace of our loving Lord, grace that exceeds our sin and our guilt, yonder on Calvary's mount outpoured, there where the blood of the Lamb was spilled. Grace, grace, God's grace. Grace that will pardon and cleanse within. Grace, grace, God's grace. It's grace that is greater than all of our sin. This morning, we're going to sing together about that grace. And as we prepare to do that, I want to extend an invitation to everyone who's here today. Maybe today, for the first time, you're ready to receive that grace for yourself, to unwrap the gift that God has given you in Jesus Christ, to know his salvation and deliverance and forgiveness for yourself. I invite you to come. And receive that. Confess your sin to him and know his presence and peace in your life. Maybe today you're a believer, but like Peter, like me, like so many of us, you find yourself blundering, walking in faithlessness, stumbling and failing in the same ways over and over again. And this morning you just want to come and say, God, I've spent too much time by the fire of denial, and I want you to forgive me and give me a new start. Show me where I can serve. Help me to serve you more faithfully. I invite you to come. Maybe today you would come and join our church this morning, where together we seek to extend the grace that is greater than all of our sin to anyone who God puts in our path. You respond to God's Spirit, however it leads, as we stand and we sing together.